For 23 years, Dean Martin had performed on stages across America. He'd sung with Sinatra. He'd harmonized with Bing Crosby. He'd traded verses with Judy Garland. But on the night of April 14th, 1965, at the Desert Inn in Las Vegas, Dean Martin stopped mid-song. Not because he forgot the lyrics, not because of technical difficulties, but because a woman walked onto his stage, uninvited and unannounced, opened her mouth to sing, and the sound that came out made him forget how to breathe. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew where she came from, and by the time the song ended, she had vanished just as mysteriously as she'd arrived. This is the story of the voice that stopped Dean Martin in his tracks, and the woman who proved that sometimes the greatest performances are the ones nobody plans for. April 1965. Las Vegas was at its peak, the Strip blazed with possibility, and the Desert Inn was hosting Dean Martin for a 6-week engagement that had sold out within hours of being announced. Dean was in his prime. His variety show on NBC was the #3 program in America. His movies were box office gold. His albums went platinum. At 47 years old, he was at the absolute height of his powers. But while Dean Martin's star was ascending in Las Vegas, Claudia Rossini's life was falling apart, 1,500 miles away in Chicago. 3 days earlier, April 11th, 1965, Claudia had been working the lunch shift at Mario's Trattoria on the North Side. It was a Tuesday, slow, and she'd been counting the minutes until her shift ended. She was tired. She was always tired these days, working 2 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, just to keep herself hidden, keep herself moving, keep herself one step ahead of Marco, her ex-husband, her nightmare, the man she'd run from but couldn't escape. At 2:47 p.m., a customer had walked into the restaurant, a regular, an elderly man named Giuseppe who came in every Tuesday for the chicken parmesan. But this time, Giuseppe had brought someone with him, a younger man, handsome, well-dressed, and when Claudia had approached their table, the younger man had smiled at her in a way that made her blood run cold. "Claudia Rossini," he'd said. Not a question, a statement. She'd frozen, the menus trembling in her hands. "I don't know. Yes, you do, and so do I. Marco sent me, says he wants to talk to you." "I don't want to talk to Marco." He wasn't asking. The man had leaned back in his chair, still smiling that terrible smile. "He knows where you work. He knows where you live. He knows you take the Clark Street bus home every night at 11:15. He knows everything, Claudia, and he says you've run long enough. Time to come home." Giuseppe had looked uncomfortable, embarrassed. "Claudia, I'm sorry. He showed up at my apartment this morning. Said if I didn't bring him here, bad things would happen to my granddaughter. I didn't have a choice." "It's okay, Giuseppe," Claudia had managed, though her voice was shaking. "It's not your fault." She'd looked at the younger man. "Tell Marco I'm not coming back. Tell him if he comes near me, I'll call the police." The man had laughed. "The police? Claudia, Marco's cousin is a sergeant in the 18th District. Who do you think is going to help you?" After they'd left, Claudia had gone to the bathroom and vomited. Then she'd splashed cold water on her face, looked at herself in the mirror, and made a decision. She was done running in circles, done hiding in Chicago where Marco had connections, where his family had power. She needed to disappear completely, and the only way to do that was to become someone else. Someone visible, someone successful enough to afford real protection. She'd walked out of Mario's Trattoria without even collecting her paycheck. She'd gone to her tiny studio apartment on Ashland Avenue, packed everything she owned into a single suitcase and counted her money. $347, 0 cents. Everything she had in the world. It wasn't enough to start over, wasn't enough to disappear properly, but it was enough for a bus ticket. At the Greyhound station, she'd stared at the departure board for 10 minutes, trying to decide where to go. Los Angeles, too obvious, Marco would look there first. New York, too expensive, she'd be broke within a week. Miami, too small, someone would recognize her eventually. Then she'd seen it. Las Vegas. The next bus left in 40 minutes. Vegas was perfect. It was big enough to get lost in, flashy enough that one more face in the crowd wouldn't matter. And most importantly, it was a city built on second chances. If you had talent, if you had drive, Vegas would give you an opportunity, maybe your only opportunity. The bus ride had taken 31 hours. Claudia had slept in fits and starts, her head against the window, dreaming of Marco's hands around her throat, Marco's fists against her face, Marco's voice telling her she was nothing, nobody, worthless. She'd arrived at the Vegas bus station at 3 a.m. on April 14th with $287.00 left. The ticket had cost $60.00, no plan, and a voice she'd been too afraid to use for 6 years. She'd spent her first few hours in Vegas, walking the Strip, staring up at the neon signs, watching the early morning gamblers stumble out of casinos. Everything was bright, everything was loud. Everything was alive in a way Chicago had never been. At 6 a.m., she'd gone into a diner and ordered coffee and toast. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, had asked where she was staying. "Nowhere yet," Claudia had admitted. "I just got into town." The waitress had studied her. "Running from something?" "Someone." The waitress had nodded knowingly. "Husband? How did you know?" "'Cause I ran from one too, honey, 20 years ago. Came to Vegas with nothing but a suitcase and a black eye. Best decision I ever made." She'd refilled Claudia's coffee without being asked. "You got any skills? Any way to make money?" "I can sing," Claudia had said quietly. I used to sing, before I got married. I was training to be an opera singer, actually, at the Chicago Conservatory. But then I met Marco, and he said—" She'd stopped herself. Marco had said a lot of things. That singing was a waste of time, that she should focus on being a wife, that her voice was pretty but nothing special, that she was delusional for thinking she could make a career of it. She'd believed him. For 6 years, she'd believed him. The waitress had leaned in conspiratorially. "You want my advice? Find a stage. Any stage, don't matter how small. Get up there and remind yourself who you are. Because men like your ex-husband, they spend years trying to make you forget. They want you small. They want you quiet. They want you believing you're nothing without them." "But what if he's right?" Claudia had whispered. "What if I'm not good enough?" "Then you'll find out. But I bet you are. I bet you're better than good enough. And I bet that's what scared him most." That conversation had changed something in Claudia. She'd spent the rest of the day walking around Vegas looking for opportunities. She'd checked the marquees at every hotel. The Sands had Sinatra, the Riviera had Shecky Greene, the Flamingo had Bobby Darin, and the Desert Inn had Dean Martin. Claudia had stopped in front of the Desert Inn's marquee and stared at Dean's name in lights. She'd grown up listening to his music. Her father had played Dean Martin records every Sunday morning while making breakfast. "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" had been her mother's favorite song. Dean Martin represented everything she'd lost: joy, laughter, the belief that life could be easy and fun and full of music. Standing there, looking at his name in lights, Claudia had made a decision. She would ask Dean Martin for help. Not just any performer, Dean, because he seemed like someone who understood struggle, who'd come from nothing and made something of himself, because his music had been the soundtrack to the happiest moments of her childhood, because she had no one else to ask. It was insane. It was desperate. It probably wouldn't work, but it was the only plan she had. Every night at the Desert Inn, Dean did 2 shows. One at 8 p.m., one at midnight. The late show was always looser, more unpredictable. That's when the real celebrities came out. That's when the magic happened. April 14th started like any other Wednesday. Dean arrived at the Desert Inn at 10:30 p.m. to prepare for his midnight show. He ran through his set list with the band, told a few jokes with the crew, sipped some coffee, not whiskey, that was mostly for show, and waited for showtime. At 11:45 p.m., the Desert Inn's entertainment director, Max Rosen, knocked on Dean's dressing room door. "Dean, we got a situation." Dean looked up from his newspaper. "What kind of situation?" "There's a woman in the lobby, says she needs to see you, says it's urgent." Dean got a lot of fans showing up claiming they needed to see him urgently. Most of them just wanted an autograph or a photo. "Tell her I'll sign whatever she wants after the show." "I tried that. She's not asking for an autograph. She says—" Max hesitated. "She says she's your sister." Dean froze. "My sister?" That's what she said. Claudia. She said her name was Claudia Crossetti. Dean set down his newspaper slowly. He had several siblings back in Ohio, brothers and sisters he hadn't seen in years. But Claudia? He didn't have a sister named Claudia. What'd she look like? Young. Maybe 25, 26. Dark hair, dark eyes. Italian, definitely. Pretty, real pretty. But also, Max struggled for the word. Haunted. She looks haunted, Dino, like she's been through something. Dean's curiosity was piqued. She by herself? Yeah. No manager, no entourage, just her and a suitcase. A suitcase? Like she's traveling or running from something. Dean thought about it. This could be a scam. Some woman pretending to be related to him, looking for money or fame. It happened all the time. But something about Max's description, the haunted look, the suitcase, made him pause. Bring her backstage, Dean said. Let's see what this is about. 5 minutes later, there was another knock on his door. Max opened it, and a young woman walked in. She was exactly as Max had described. Mid-20s, dark Italian features, beautiful in a way that seemed almost out of time, like she belonged in a Renaissance painting, not a Las Vegas casino. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no makeup except a touch of lipstick. Her eyes were large and dark, and yes, haunted, like someone who'd seen too much, felt too much, lost too much. Mr. Martin, she said. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Thank you for seeing me. Max says you're my sister, Dean said, not unkindly. But I don't have a sister named Claudia. I know, she said. I'm sorry for the lie. I needed to see you. And I knew they wouldn't let me back here unless I said something that would get your attention. So you're not related to me? No. Dean waited for her to explain. When she didn't immediately continue, he gestured to a chair. Sit down. Tell me what this is about. She sat, her hands folded in her lap. My name is Claudia Rossini. I'm from Chicago, or I was from Chicago. She took a deep breath. I'm nobody. I'm a waitress. Or I was a waitress until 3 days ago. But I need your help, Mr. Martin. Help with what? I need to disappear. Dean exchanged a glance with Max. This was getting stranger by the minute. Disappear from what? Dean asked. From my husband? Ex-husband? He's not a good man, Mr. Martin. He's dangerous. I left him 3 months ago, but he found me. He always finds me, so I took what money I had, got on a bus, and came here. To Vegas. Because I figured in a city this big, with this many people, maybe I could finally disappear. What's this got to do with me? She looked him straight in the eye. Because I'm a singer, Mr. Martin, and I'm good, really good. Good enough that if I could just get one break, one chance to be heard, I could make enough money to really disappear, to go somewhere he'd never find me. Dean leaned back in his chair. He'd heard variations of this story 1,000 times. Everyone in America thought they could sing. Everyone thought they deserved a break, and 99% of them were wrong. Miss Rossini, Dean said gently, I appreciate what you're going through. I really do. But I can't just put someone on stage with me because they show up and ask. I got a professional reputation to maintain. I'm not asking you to put me on stage, she said quickly. I'm just asking you to listen. Give me 60 seconds, one song, and if I'm not good enough, I'll leave. You'll never see me again. Claudia, please. There was desperation in her voice now. I've got nothing left. No money, no family, no friends. Just this. She touched her throat. Just my voice. And if I can't use it, if I can't make something of it, then I don't know what I'm going to do. Dean studied her face. He saw genuine fear there, genuine desperation. Whether her story was true or not, she believed it. She was terrified. One song, Dean said finally. Right now, just you and me in this room, and I'll tell you honestly if you've got what it takes. Relief flooded her face. Thank you so much. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and took a breath. No warm-up, no preparation. She just opened her mouth and began to sing. My Funny Valentine. The moment the first note left her lips, Dean Martin understood that his life had just changed. Her voice wasn't just good. It wasn't even great. It was transcendent. It had a quality that Dean had only heard a handful of times in his entire career. A richness, a depth, an emotional resonance that bypassed your brain and went straight to your soul. She sang without accompaniment, just her voice, filling his small dressing room, transforming it into something sacred. My funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine. Her voice had pain in it, real pain. The kind you can't fake, can't manufacture. It was the voice of someone who'd lived the lyrics, who understood heartbreak not as a concept, but as a daily reality. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable. Dean felt goosebumps rising on his arms. This was the real thing. This was what every performer hoped to find in themselves, that connection between technique and emotion, between skill and soul. But don't change a hair for me. Not if you care for me. When she finished, the room was silent. Dean couldn't speak, couldn't move. He was a professional performer who'd seen thousands of acts, who'd worked with the best singers in the world. But this woman, this waitress from Chicago who'd walked into his dressing room with a suitcase and a lie, was something special. "Well?" Claudia asked nervously. "You're going on tonight?" Dean said. She blinked. "What? Tonight? My show. You're going on with me." "Mr. Martin, I wasn't asking for that. I just wanted—" "I know what you asked for, but I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to stand on that stage with me, and you're going to sing. Because that voice," he pointed at her, "that voice needs to be heard. And I'm not going to be the guy who heard it and did nothing." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." At 12:03 AME, Dean Martin walked on to the Desert Inn stage to thunderous applause. The showroom was packed, over 500 people, including Cary Grant, Lucille Ball, and Kirk Douglas. Vegas royalty had come out to see the King of Cool do his thing. Dean did his usual opening patter, telling jokes about his drinking and his ex-wives. The audience loved it. He sang "Everybody Loves Somebody" and "Ain't That a Kick in the Head." The crowd sang along, but the whole time, Dean's mind was on Claudia Rossini, waiting backstage. He hadn't told anyone what he was planning. Not Max Rosen. Not the band. Not even the audience. He was about to spring a complete unknown on a room full of celebrities and high rollers, and he had no idea how they'd react. After finishing Memories Are Made of This, Dean set down his drink and addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to try something different tonight. Something spontaneous. Something I've never done before in 23 years of performing." The audience murmured with interest. "A little while ago, a young woman came to my dressing room. She's a singer. Not a famous singer, not a professional singer, just someone with a voice and a dream. And I heard that voice, and I thought, you know what? This audience deserves to hear it too." He turned toward the wings. "So, if you don't mind, I'd like to invite Miss Claudia Rossini to join me on stage." There was scattered, polite applause. The audience was confused, but willing to go along with it. This was Dean Martin, after all. If he said someone was worth hearing, they'd listen. Claudia emerged from the wings. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking. She walked slowly to center stage, and Dean could see she was on the verge of panic. He took her hand and whispered, "Breathe, just breathe." And then he whispered, "They're going to love you." "I can't do this," she whispered back. "There's too many people." "Yes, you can. Look at me. Forget about them. Just look at me and sing." The band waited, unsure of what to play. Dean turned to them and said, "My Funny Valentine," nice and slow. The band started the intro. Claudia closed her eyes, and for a moment, Dean thought she might run off stage. But then she opened her mouth, and that voice, that impossible, perfect voice, filled the room. My Funny Valentine. The first note hung in the air like a prayer. It was pure, clean, technically flawless, but that wasn't what made people stop talking. It was the emotion behind it, raw, unfiltered, real. The audience, who'd been chatting and drinking and only half paying attention, went quiet. Sweet comic Valentine. People set down their drinks. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Every eye turned to the unknown woman standing next to Dean Martin. Cary Grant had been telling a joke to the people at his table. He stopped mid-punchline, his mouth hanging open. Lucille Ball, who'd been signing autographs for fans, put down her pen and turned toward the stage. Kirk Douglas straightened in his seat, leaning forward, transfixed. "You make me smile with my heart." Dean watched the audience transformation and knew this was something special. He'd seen great performances before. Hell, he'd been part of hundreds of them. But this was different. This wasn't just technical skill or vocal prowess. This was a woman pouring her soul out in public, using every ounce of pain she'd accumulated over years of abuse and turning it into art. Cary Grant leaned forward in his seat. Lucille Ball had her hand over her mouth. Kirk Douglas just stared, transfixed. Dean watched the audience's reaction, and he knew he'd made the right call. This wasn't just a good voice. This was a once-in-a-generation voice, the kind that reminded you why you fell in love with music in the first place. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable. Claudia's eyes were still closed. Tears had started streaming down her face, cutting tracks through her minimal makeup. Her hands were clasped together at her waist, knuckles white from gripping so hard. She was trembling. Dean could see it from 3 feet away, but her voice never wavered. In the third row, a woman Dean didn't recognize began crying too. Then another woman in the 5th row. Then an older gentleman in the back. Claudia's pain was contagious, spreading through the audience like a shared grief. But then Dean noticed something. Claudia was crying. Not sobbing, not breaking down, but silent tears were streaming down her face as she sang. The emotion in her voice was overwhelming. Not just performative emotion, but real, raw pain. "Yet you're my favorite work of art." Dean glanced at his conductor, who had tears in his eyes. The drummer had stopped playing for a measure, too moved to keep time, then picked it back up. Even the waiters had stopped serving, standing frozen with their trays, listening. "Is your figure less than Greek?" This was the moment Dean realized what was happening. Claudia wasn't singing to the audience. She wasn't even singing to him. She was singing to Marco, her ex-husband, her abuser, the man who told her she was nothing. She was singing to every person who'd ever made her feel small, and in doing so, she was reclaiming her voice, literally and figuratively. "Is your mouth a little weak?" The vulnerability in her voice was devastating. Every crack, every tremor, every tear-soaked syllable was honest. You couldn't fake this. You couldn't manufacture it. This was what it sounded like when someone's heart broke in real time and they had the courage to let everyone hear it. When you open it to speak, are you smart? In the front row, a young couple was holding hands, both crying. An older man had his handkerchief out, dabbing at his eyes. Even the casino manager, a hardened veteran who'd seen everything Vegas had to offer, was visibly moved. Dean felt his own throat tightening. He'd performed with the best: Sinatra, Crosby, Garland, Ella Fitzgerald. But he'd never seen someone be this vulnerable on stage. It took more courage than any technical performance ever could. "But don't change a hair for me." Claudia's voice broke slightly on that line, and somehow it made it more beautiful, more real. The audience gasped collectively, as if they'd all felt her pain at the exact same moment. "Not if you care for me." The band was following her now, adjusting to her emotional tempo rather than trying to lead her. The pianist was playing softer, giving her room. The bass player had tears streaming down his face. Even the trumpet player, a grizzled veteran who'd performed with everyone from Basie to Ellington, was staring at Claudia with something like awe. "Stay, little Valentine, stay." The audience was completely silent now. No coughing, no rustling, no glasses clinking. 500 people holding their collective breath, afraid that any sound would break the spell. Dean looked around the room and saw something extraordinary. People weren't just listening. They were experiencing catharsis through Claudia's voice. Everyone in that room had lost someone or something. Everyone had experienced heartbreak, and Claudia was giving voice to all of it. Each day is Valentine's Day. Dean knew instinctively that this wasn't just a performance. She was singing to someone. About someone. Maybe her ex-husband. Maybe a love she'd lost. Maybe a life she'd left behind. Whatever it was real. The song built to its conclusion, and Claudia held the final note, a long, aching, beautiful note that seemed to contain all the heartbreak in the world. When it ended, she opened her eyes for the first time since she'd started singing. She looked confused, disoriented, like she'd been somewhere else entirely and had just returned to find herself on stage. The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for exactly 5 seconds. Dean counted them, and in those 5 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The entire room was suspended in time. Then it exploded. 500 people rose to their feet, applauding, cheering, whistling. Cary Grant was on his feet. Lucille Ball was crying. The applause went on, lasting nearly 2 minutes, an eternity in performance terms. Dean looked at Claudia, who seemed stunned. She'd been living in fear, living in hiding, believing she was nobody, believing she had nothing to offer the world. And in 3 minutes, she'd proven herself wrong. Dean pulled her into a hug, whispering in her ear, "You just became somebody, kid, whether you wanted to or not." When they walked off stage, Max Rosen was waiting in the wings with about 15 other people. Agents, managers, record executives, they'd all been in the audience, and they all wanted a piece of Claudia Rossini. "Miss Rossini," one of them said, pushing forward. "Tony Valenti, Capitol Records. I want to talk to you about a recording contract." "Miss Rossini," another shouted. "William Morris Agency. We can make you a star." Claudia looked overwhelmed, terrified by the attention. Dean put himself between her and the crowd. "Gentlemen," he said firmly, "give the lady some space. She just performed for the first time in front of a real audience. She needs a minute to breathe." He guided her back to his dressing room and closed the door behind them. Claudia collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. "That was—" she couldn't finish the sentence. "That was incredible," Dean finished for her. "You understand what just happened out there? You just had Cary Grant giving you a standing ovation. Lucille Ball was crying. Those people out in the hallway, those are the most powerful people in the music industry. They all want to sign you. I can't believe this is real," she whispered. "It's real? But here's the thing, Claudia. You've got decisions to make now. Big decisions. Those people out there, they're going to want to package you, market you, turn you into a product. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's the break you've been looking for." He sat down across from her. "But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. That song you just sang, who were you singing it to?" She looked up at him, her eyes red. "How did you know?" "Because I've been performing my whole life. I know the difference between singing a song and living a song. You were living it." Claudia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "His name was Marco, my husband. Ex-husband. I met him when I was 19. He was charming, romantic, everything I thought I wanted. But after we got married, he changed. Or maybe he didn't change. Maybe that was who he always was, and I just didn't see it." She wiped her eyes. "He was possessive, jealous, violent. The first time he hit me, I told myself it was a mistake, that he was stressed, that it would never happen again. But it did happen again. And again. For 6 years. Dean's jaw tightened. He'd grown up around men who hit women. He'd always despised them. 3 months ago," Claudia continued, "I finally found the courage to leave. I packed a bag while he was at work, and I ran. I went to my sister's place in Milwaukee. But he found me. He always finds me. So I ran again. And I kept running. And eventually I ended up here. That's why you wanted to disappear. And eventually I ended up here. That's why you wanted to disappear. That's why I needed to disappear. Because as long as I'm nobody, as long as I'm just a waitress or a clerk or whatever, I can hide. But now..." She gestured toward the door, toward the agents and executives waiting outside. "Now I'm visible. Now people will be looking for me. And that means he'll find me." Dean understood the problem. Success meant visibility. Visibility meant vulnerability. "What do you want to do? Were you a drug dealer?" He asked. "I don't know. I thought I wanted this. The singing, the recognition. And I do want it. God, I want it so badly. But I'm scared, Mr. Martin. I'm terrified that if I step into the spotlight, he'll see me. And if he sees me..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Dean thought about it. He thought about his own career, his own journey from Dino Crossetti in Steubenville to Dean Martin in Vegas. He thought about all the people he'd known who'd been broken by fame and all the people he'd known who'd been broken by obscurity. "Here's what I think," he said finally. "I think you're one of the most talented singers I've ever heard. I think that voice of yours is a gift, not just to you, but to everyone who gets to hear it. And I think hiding that gift because you're afraid is exactly what that bastard wants. He wants you small. He wants you scared. He wants you running." He leaned forward. "So don't run. Stand. Build a career. Build a life. Get successful enough that you can afford security, protection, lawyers. Get powerful enough that he can't touch you anymore. Use your voice not just to sing, but to fight back. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But Claudia, you've already survived 6 years of abuse. You've already found the courage to leave. Compared to that, becoming a star is easy." There was a knock on the door. Mac's voice. "Dino, Tony Valenti from Capitol is getting impatient out here." Dean looked at Claudia. "Your choice. I'll tell them to leave if you want, or you can go out there and start negotiating." Claudia sat there for a long moment, her hands clasped together. Then she stood up, wiped her eyes, and straightened her dress. "Tell them I'll be right out," she said, "and tell them I want Dean Martin's lawyer present for any negotiation. I don't know this business, but I trust Mr. Martin does." Dean smiled. Smart girl. Claudia Rossini signed with Capitol Records 3 days later. Her first single, My Funny Valentine, was released in July 1965 and hit number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100. Her debut album, Claudia, went gold within 3 months. The recording process had been both exhilarating and terrifying for Claudia. She'd never been in a professional studio before. The first time she'd walked into Capitol's Studio A on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles, she'd been overwhelmed by the technology, the musicians, the producers. But Dean had been there with her, introducing her to everyone, making sure she felt comfortable. "Remember?" he'd told her before her first recording session. "The microphone is just another person in the audience. You're not performing for machines. You're performing for people who'll hear this years from now and need what you're offering." Her first album had taken 6 weeks to record. They'd done 12 tracks, each one a standard from the American Songbook. Someone to Watch Over Me, The Man I Love, Cry Me a River, songs about love and loss and songs Claudia understood in her bones. The producer, a man named Phil Harrison, who'd worked with Peggy Lee and Julie London, had been skeptical at first. "She's got no experience," he told the label executives. "She's never performed professionally. This could be a disaster." But after the first take of Cry Me a River, Phil had walked into the recording booth with tears in his eyes. "Do you know what you have?" he'd asked Claudia. "Do you understand how rare this is?" "What?" she'd asked nervously. "Truth. Pure, unfiltered truth. Most singers spend their whole careers trying to fake the emotion you have naturally. Don't ever lose that. Don't ever let anyone make you pretty it up or smooth out the rough edges. The rough edges are what make you real." But more importantly, she used the money from that first record deal to hire a lawyer and security. She got a restraining order against her ex-husband. She moved to Los Angeles and bought a house with a security system and a guard at the gate. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms in Laurel Canyon, but it was hers. The first thing she'd ever owned that didn't belong to Marco, didn't have his presence in it. She'd painted every room herself, hung her own curtains, planted flowers in the garden, reclaiming her life one small decision at a time. Marco Rossini tried to contact her twice, once by phone, once by showing up at a recording studio. Both times he was met by security and police. The second time he was arrested for violating the restraining order and spent 6 months in jail. The second incident had been terrifying. Claudia had been at Capitol Studios recording her second album when Marco had somehow gotten past reception and made it to the hallway outside Studio A. He'd been screaming her name, pounding on the door, demanding she come out and talk to him. "You think you're someone now," he'd yelled. "You think because you made a record, you don't need me anymore? You're nothing without me, Claudia, you hear me? Nothing." Phil Harrison had called security immediately, but before they arrived, Dean Martin had been there. He'd been visiting the studio to check on Claudia's progress, and when he'd heard the commotion, he'd walked straight out into the hallway. "Mr. Rossini," Dean had said calmly, "I'm going to ask you to leave. Once, nicely. If you don't leave, security will make you leave, and trust me, you don't want that." Marco had turned his fury on Dean. This is your fault. You put ideas in her head, made her think she's something special. She is something special, but she always was. She just didn't know it yet. She's my wife, ex-wife, and even when she was your wife, she didn't belong to you. Nobody belongs to anybody. That's not how love works. Marco had lunged at Dean, but security had arrived at that moment, grabbing him and dragging him away. He'd been screaming threats and obscenities the whole way out of the building. After that incident, Claudia had considered giving it all up. The fear was too much. The constant looking over her shoulder, the nightmares. Maybe Marco was right. Maybe she wasn't strong enough for this life. But Dean had sat with her in the studio for 3 hours that afternoon, just talking. "You know what courage is?" he'd asked her. "Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being terrified and doing it anyway. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, Claudia. You got out, you built a life, you're making art that matters. Don't let him take that away from you." "But what if he never stops? What if he keeps coming and you keep building your life anyway? You keep singing, you keep recording, you keep being you. Because the moment you stop, the moment you let fear win, he wins. And after everything you've survived, you don't get to let him win now." After that, he stopped trying. Or maybe he finally understood that Claudia Rossini wasn't the scared woman he'd married anymore. She was someone else now, someone stronger, someone who'd found her voice in more ways than one. Dean and Claudia remained friends for years. She appeared on his variety show 3 times. They recorded a duet album in 1967 called Two Voices that went platinum. At industry events, people would ask Dean, "How did you know? How did you know she'd be a star?" His answer was always the same. "I didn't know she'd be a star. I just knew she needed to be heard." Years later, in 1982, Dean was being interviewed for a retrospective about his career. The interviewer brought up that night at the Desert Inn, the night he'd brought an unknown singer on stage without warning. That was a huge risk, the interviewer said. She could have bombed. Could have been terrible. Why did you do it? Dean thought about it. "You ever hear something," he said finally, "that reminds you why you got into this business in the first place? Not for the money or the fame or the parties, but because music, real singing, can change someone's life?" He paused. "That's what Claudia's voice did for me. It reminded me that underneath all the showmanship and the cool persona and the jokes about drinking, I'm just a guy from Ohio who loves to sing. And when I heard her sing, I remembered what it felt like to love music purely, without any of the baggage that comes with success." "So you put her on stage for yourself?" the interviewer asked. "No," Dean said. "I put her on stage for her, because everyone deserves a chance to be heard. Everyone deserves a moment where they can stand in front of the world and say, 'This is me, this is my gift, this is what I have to offer.'